The morning sun filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Raj Kumar's penthouse office, casting long shadows across his mahogany desk. At 45, he had everything money could buy: a thriving tech empire, a luxurious lifestyle, and a reputation as one of Asia's most successful entrepreneurs. Yet something felt off about this particular morning. His assistant walked in, carrying a registered letter that would change everything. "This came through special delivery, sir," she said, placing the cream-colored envelope on his desk. The return address made his heart skip a beat. It was from Priya, his ex-wife. Raj hadn't heard from Priya in years. Their marriage had ended during their struggling days, long before his company hit it big. With slightly trembling hands, he opened the letter, his eyes scanning the handwritten words that seemed to blur together at first. "Dear Raj," the letter began, "what I'm about to tell you should have been said years ago." He leaned back in his chair, coffee forgotten, as Priya's words revealed a truth that shattered his world. Anjali, their daughter whom he'd raised alone after the divorce, wasn't just their only child. She was one of Quadruplets. His mind raced back to those early days, their tiny apartment, the endless instant noodle dinners, Priya's unusually difficult pregnancy. They'd been so young, so overwhelmed. But quadruplets? How had he not known? Priya's letter explained everything. During her pregnancy, she'd learned they were having 4 babies. Terrified they couldn't provide for all of them in their financial situation, she'd made an impossible choice. After birth, she arranged for 3 of the babies to be adopted by families who could give them better lives. She'd kept Anjali, knowing Raj had always wanted a daughter. But now, 25 years later, fate had forced her hand. One of their daughters, living halfway across the world, was dying. She needed a kidney transplant, and only a sibling match could save her life. Raj stared out at the city skyline, his empire suddenly feeling meaningless. All these years, he prided himself on being a good father to Anjali, on giving her everything he never had. Now he learned that 3 other children had grown up without him, without knowing their true identity. He pressed the intercom. "Cancel all my meetings for the week," he said, his voice hoarse. Opening his laptop, he began what would become the most important search of his life. Somewhere out there, his children needed him, not his money, not his influence, but him. As he started making calls, a photo on his desk caught his eye. It showed him and Anjali at her college graduation, both beaming with pride. How would she react to this news? Would she forgive him for not knowing about her siblings? Would she understand that he was as much in the dark as she was? His phone buzzed. Anjali was calling. For a moment, he stared at her smiling contact photo, remembering the little girl who used to fall asleep in his office while he worked late nights building his company. Now he had to tell her that their small, close-knit family of 2 was about to expand in ways neither of them could have imagined. Taking a deep breath, he answered the call. "Beta," he said, using his special nickname for her, "I need to tell you something important. Can you come over?" The search for his long-lost children was about to begin, and nothing in his years of business success had prepared him for this challenge. This wasn't about mergers or acquisitions or market shares. This was about family, about healing old wounds, and about racing against time to save a daughter he'd never met. As he waited for Anjali to arrive, Raj Kumar, the billionaire who could solve any problem with money, faced the reality that some things in life demanded more than just wealth. They demanded courage, forgiveness, and most importantly, love. Anjali sat across from her father in his home office, tears streaming down her face. The news of her 3 siblings had shaken her world. After a lifetime of being an only child, she now had 3 sisters she never knew existed, and one of them was fighting for her life. "Why didn't Mai tell us sooner?" she whispered, clutching the letter in her trembling hands. Raj wished he had an answer that could ease her pain. The weight of 25 years of secrets hung heavy in the air between them. The next morning, Raj transformed the top floor of his company into a search headquarters. His most trusted team members worked around the clock, following adoption records across 3 continents. Each day brought new challenges, dead ends, and faint hopes. Anjali threw herself into the search too, but something was different. Her father noticed how she'd pause whenever he mentioned her siblings, how she'd grow quiet during their evening discussions. One night, over their favorite takeout dinner, she finally opened up. "Papa, what if they hate us?" she asked, pushing her food around the plate. We lived in comfort while we don't even know what their lives were like. The guilt in her voice broke his heart. Beta, listen to me, he said gently, reaching for her hand. You're not responsible for choices made before you could even speak. What matters is what we do now. Their first breakthrough came 3 weeks into the search. One of the adoption agencies in Singapore had maintained detailed records. A daughter had been adopted by a family working with Doctors Without Borders. The excitement of discovery quickly mixed with anxiety. How do you tell someone their whole life story might be different from what they believed? Ranger's team tracked her current location to a small medical clinic in Thailand. Dr. Ria Chen had followed in her adoptive parents' footsteps, dedicating her life to helping others in underserved communities. The irony wasn't lost on Raj. While he built his fortune in technology, his unknown daughter had chosen a path of service. Planning the trip to Thailand brought new tensions. Anjali insisted on coming, despite her father's concerns about the emotional toll. She's my sister, Papa, she said firmly. If our positions were reversed, wouldn't you want her to come find me too? The night before their flight, Raj couldn't sleep. He stood on his balcony, looking out at the city lights. 25 years ago, he'd been a young man struggling to make ends meet. Now he commanded a business empire, but none of that mattered. Tomorrow, he would meet a daughter who had lived an entire life without him. He thought about the other 2 daughters still out there, especially the one fighting for her life. Time was running out. They needed to find all of them, not just for the kidney transplant, but because every day that passed was another day lost to history. Anjali joined him on the balcony, wrapping herself in her mother's old shawl. I packed some old family photos, she said quietly. And that silver pendant you gave me on my 16th birthday. Maybe she'd like to see them. As father and daughter stood together under the stars, they shared an unspoken understanding. Whatever happened tomorrow would change their lives forever. Their small family of 2 was about to expand, and with that expansion would come joy, pain, and complications they couldn't even imagine. Papa, Anjali said softly, do you think she looks like me? Raj pulled his daughter close, remembering how she used to ask him the same question about her mother when she was little. We'll find out soon, Beta, he replied. We'll find out soon. Dawn was breaking over the city as they finished their preparations. Their driver would arrive in 2 hours to take them to the airport. Soon they would be on their way to Thailand to meet a sister, a daughter, and perhaps find the first piece in healing their fractured family. The humid Thai air clung to them as they stepped out of their air-conditioned car. Raj and Anjali stood before a modest medical clinic, its white walls weathered by tropical storms. Inside, unknowing of their arrival, their daughter and sister was treating patients. I can't feel my legs, Papa, Anjali whispered, gripping her father's arm. The reality of meeting her sister had hit her full force. Raj understood. His own heart was racing beneath his carefully pressed shirt. They had decided against calling ahead. After several failed attempts to make contact through official channels, they chose to come in person. Now, watching patients stream in and out of the clinic, they wondered if they'd made the right choice. A young nurse greeted them at the reception, her English careful but clear. Dr. Chen is with a patient. Would you like to wait? They nodded, taking seats in the simple waiting area. A fan whirred overhead, fighting the midday heat. Through the open windows, they could hear children playing in the schoolyard next door. An old woman sat across from them, smiling toothlessly as she cradled a sleeping baby. The clinic walls displayed posters about vaccination schedules and proper hand-washing techniques in multiple languages. That's her, Anjali suddenly breathed, squeezing her father's hand. Through the doorway, they saw a doctor in a white coat checking a child's throat. Her movements were gentle, practiced, and somehow familiar. Even from this distance, the resemblance to Anjali was striking. Raj felt his world tilt. In his daughter's professional grace, he saw echoes of Priya, his ex-wife, during their early days when she dreamed of becoming a doctor herself. Life had taken them down a different path, but here was their daughter, living out that dream. When the last patient left, they approached the nurse again. "We need to speak with Dr. Chen," Raj said softly. "It's a personal matter." Something in his voice must have conveyed the gravity of their visit, because the nurse simply nodded and disappeared into the back. Moments later, Dr. Ria Chen stepped out, her white coat now draped over her arm. how can I help you?" she asked, her voice carrying a slight Singaporean accent. Up close, the resemblance to Anjali was undeniable, the same shaped eyes, the same way of tilting their head when curious. "Dr. Chen," Raj began, his carefully prepared speech deserting him. We. He reached for the envelope in his pocket, the one containing photos and documents that would change her life forever. Anjali stepped forward. "I think I'm your sister," she said simply, tears spilling down her cheeks. "And we need your help to save another sister's life." Raya's professional composure cracked. She took a step back, catching herself against the wall. Her eyes darted between them, recognition and denial warring on her face. I'm adopted, yes, but—" "Please," Raj said, holding out the envelope. "Just look at these. We can—" Headlines flashed across business news channels worldwide. Tech rivals share more than market space. They share DNA. The story broke just hours after Raj's team discovered his son's identity. Rohan Kapoor, the founder of Future Tech Solutions, wasn't just his biggest competitor, he was his son. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. For years, their companies had battled for market dominance. Raj's Innovation Tech and Rohan's Future Tech were constantly trying to outmaneuver each other. Now father and son stood on opposite sides of the corporate battlefield, neither knowing their true connection until this moment. In his Berlin office, Rohan stared at his phone, reading message after message about the breaking news. His adoptive parents had always been honest about his adoption, but they'd never known his birth parents' identities. Now, watching Raj's familiar face on every business channel, pieces of his past began falling into place. "Sir," his assistant called through the intercom, "Raj Kumar is here to see you." Rohan straightened his tie, a habit he'd developed during tense business negotiations. But this wasn't business. This was family. The door opened, and for the first time, father and son faced each other as more than rivals. They shared the same sharp features, the same determined set of their jaw. Even their suits, both charcoal gray, seemed to mirror each other. "You've built quite a company," Raj said quietly, breaking the silence. "I should have recognized my own drive in you." Rohan remained standing behind his desk, hands gripping the edge. 25 years, he said, his voice tight. "You were right there, competing with me, and neither of us knew." He paused, a bitter laugh escaping. "Did you know I studied every move you made? I wanted to understand how you thought, how you operated. I guess now I know why it came so naturally." The tension in the room was cut by Rohan. The beeping of hospital monitors filled the room in Sydney's largest hospital. Meera, the marine biologist's sister, lay in her bed, her skin pale against the white sheets. Time was running out. Her kidney function had dropped to 15. The waiting room during Anjali and Meera's surgery was heavy with tension. Raj paced the floor while Rohan typed furiously on his laptop, trying to distract himself. Rohingya studied the medical charts, though she wasn't allowed to be involved in the procedure. That's when they heard a familiar voice, one that hadn't been heard in 25 years. "I had to come," Priya said softly from the doorway. She looked older, her hair streaked with gray, but her eyes held the same determination they had years ago. The room fell silent. Raj stopped pacing. His ex-wife stood before him, clutching a worn leather bag, the same one she'd carried during their marriage. 2 decades had passed, but somehow this detail made everything feel more real. "You could have told me sooner," he said, his voice breaking. "All these years, I had a right to know about my children." Priya pulled out a stack of letters from her bag, their edges yellow with age. "I tried," she whispered. "Every year on their birthday, I wrote to your office. But your staff—" She handed him the letters, all marked "Return to Sender." Rohan moved closer, his business facade cracking as he saw his birth date on one of the envelopes. "You tried to reach us. Your father was becoming successful," Priya explained, sinking into a chair. "His company was growing. His staff thought I was after his money. They blocked every attempt I made to contact him." Ria, who had been quiet, spoke up. "But why separate us in the first place? Why not tell Papa about all of us?" Priya's eyes filled with tears. "We were so young, so poor. The pregnancy was difficult. 4 babies." She looked at Raj. "Remember our apartment? The one with the leaking roof? We could barely feed ourselves. I thought I thought giving 3 of you a chance at a better life was the kindest thing I could do. The truth hung in the air like a heavy cloud. Raj remembered those days, the endless overtime, the dreams of success that seemed impossible. Would they have managed with 4 babies? He'd become successful later, but those early years. I chose families carefully, Priya continued. Doctors, teachers, people who could give you opportunities we couldn't. I kept track of you all from a distance. Rohan, when your company made headlines competing with your father's, I cried for days. Ria, I read every article about your work in Thailand. Meera, I followed your research papers about marine conservation. But you never reached out to us directly, Rohan said, his tone somewhere between accusation and understanding. The adoption agreements were closed. I promised to stay away. Priya pulled out more papers, photographs, newspaper clippings, school reports. But I never stopped loving you. I never stopped watching over you from afar. A nurse entered the room, breaking the intense moment. The surgery is going well, she announced. Both patients are stable. Relief washed over everyone, but the conversation wasn't finished. Raj picked up one of the returned letters, its postal marks faded. I'd fired that entire office staff 5 years ago, he said quietly. If I had known. We can't change the past, Ria said, her doctor's pragmatism showing through. But we're here now, all of us. Priya looked at her children, the ones present and the 2 in surgery. I never imagined this day would come. All of you together, saving each other. Maybe this is how it was meant to be. As evening approached, they shared a meal in the hospital cafeteria. Priya told stories of her pregnancy, how each baby had kicked differently, how she'd sung to them in Hindi. Raj remembered their early marriage, their dreams, their struggles. The children listened, understanding for the first time how love and desperation had shaped their destinies. Outside, the Sydney sun set over the harbour. In an operating room above, 2 sisters were being bound together not just by blood, but by sacrifice. And in a quiet hospital cafeteria, a family was healing wounds that had taken 25 years to acknowledge. 6 months after the successful transplant surgery, the Kumar family gathered at Raj's beachside villa in Goa. The sound of waves mixed with laughter as 4 siblings sat around a bonfire, sharing stories under the stars. Their parents watched from the balcony, marveling at how life had come full circle. Meera, now fully recovered, was explaining her latest research project. The coral reefs are like us, she said, gesturing with her hands. Separated pieces that look different but are connected deep down. Her health had improved dramatically thanks to Anjali's kidney, and she'd recently returned to her beloved ocean research. Anjali, still sporting a small scar from the surgery, leaned against her sister. The 2 had grown incredibly close during their recovery. Speaking of connections, she said, pulling out her tablet, wait until you see what Papa and Rohan have been working on. Rohan grinned, setting down his coconut water. The biggest business news of the year hadn't been about competition anymore, it was about collaboration. Innovation tech and future tech had merged, creating the world's largest technology foundation focused on family reunification. The software we're developing, he explained, will help adoptees find their biological families if they choose to. It's already helped 3 families reconnect. The project had given him a way to channel his business skills into healing others who shared similar stories. Ria, who had taken a break from her clinic in Thailand, added, and the foundation is supporting medical missions worldwide. She'd helped design a program that provided healthcare in communities where separated families often lost touch due to poverty or lack of resources. Inside the house, Priya was preparing dinner, teaching the family cook her special biryani recipe. The kitchen filled with aromatic spices as she shared stories about each child's birth, details she'd held close to her heart for 25 years. Raj stood nearby, chopping vegetables, their old rhythm in the kitchen somehow still intact. Remember how we used to dream about cooking in a big kitchen? He asked softly. They had come so far from their tiny apartment with the temperamental stove. Priya nodded, adding a pinch of cardamom to the pot. The evening news played quietly on a nearby tablet. Their story had inspired a national conversation about adoption rights and family reunification. Laws were being reviewed, support systems strengthened. Their pain had turned into purpose, their reunion into a revolution. Later that night, as the family sat around the dining table, Meera raised her glass. To Anjali, she said, her voice full of emotion, "My sister, my donor, my hero." But Anjali shook her head, reaching for her siblings' hands. "To family," she corrected. "To finding each other against all odds." Rohan, usually focused on his phone, had turned it off completely. He'd learned that some connections couldn't be measured in data or profits. Rina shared updates about her clinic, now supported by the family foundation. Each sibling had found a way to weave their individual strengths into their shared story. As midnight approached, they gathered on the beach. The moon cast silver light across the water as they released paper lanterns into the sky, one for each year they'd been apart, and one for each year ahead. Raj watched his children, now grown, standing together at the water's edge. "We did good," Priya whispered, standing beside him. "Despite everything, they all became amazing people." "They did," Raj agreed. "And now they have each other." The family stayed up until dawn, making plans for the future. Rohan was opening a tech center in Thailand near Ria's clinic. Meera and Anjali were collaborating on an ocean conservation app. Their separate lives had become beautifully intertwined. As the sun rose over the Arabian Sea, painting the sky in shades of hope, the Kumar family stood together, parents, children, siblings. Their story had begun in separation, but it would continue in unity. They had proven that it's never too late for second chances, never too late for love to find its way home. And somewhere in the distance, a new day began, promising more stories of reunion, more families finding their way back to each other, inspired by four siblings who refused to let time, distance, or circumstance keep them apart.